right. We're either going to have a few amendments that the Republicans put up, the Democrats put up, and we get back to legislating like we should, or the leader.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, this month we celebrate the 41st anniversary of the Supreme Court decision in Roe v. Wade, a ruling that assured every woman her constitutional right to make her own decision about whether and when to have a child, based on her fundamental right to have her privacy protected. I had the honor to clerk for the author of Roe v. Wade, Justice Harry Blackmun, in 1974, shortly after that decision. And I can say that in that year, few of us expected that we would be here 41 years later, facing the kind of attack, in fact, the onslaught on women's health care and on that right to privacy that we see again and again and again on the part of states and even in this United States Congress. Just today, the House of Representatives will debate and probably vote on a bill that would severely restrict, very practically constrict, a woman's right to choose. H.R. 7 is a threat to that right of privacy. And instead of moving forward in protecting women's health, all too often we have seen those ongoing attacks. After 4 decades, this judgment is threatened by onerous and ongoing limitations repeatedly passed by state legislatures and this body. So I'm very proud to be joined today by 2 of my most distinguished colleagues, Senator Murray of the state of Washington and Senator Baldwin of Wisconsin, who have been really tireless champions for women's rights, for constitutional rights, and for women's health care. And I am humbled and admiring of the work that they have already done and the work that we have ahead of us, because I've introduced, with their support, particularly with the active work of Senator Baldwin, a measure that will proactively and preventively protect women's rights against this onslaught at the state level. The Women's Health Protection Act is designed to stop restrictions that purportedly protect women's health, but really use that cause as a ruse and a ploy to impose physical layouts on clinics, admitting privileges on doctors, other kinds of severely burdensome restrictions like ultrasound requirements when there's no real medical reason for them, and basically apply to abortion health care the same kinds of restrictions and no more limitations than are required for medically comparable procedures. That's the basic principle. And the goal is to push back on the offensive onslaught on women's health care, to put us on the offensive rather than defensive, because undoubtedly most of these restrictions, if not all, will be eventually struck down by the courts. But the resources required to do so are themselves burdensome on the organizations and groups and individuals who are forced to carry on that fight. I know about that fight because I helped to wage it as an Attorney General in the state of Connecticut for 20 years. I'm very proud that I enforced many of the laws that are designed to protect the women's right to choose, including the FACE statute. As the first Attorney General to enforce the FACE statute, we had many of the issues that are now before the Supreme Court in the McCullen versus Coakley case, which I hope will be decided to uphold the buffer zone that makes women's rights real against the intimidation and the deterrence that anti-choice groups tried to bring. Making these rights real. The right of privacy, the right to be left alone, is the fundamental reason that we've introduced the Women's Health Care Protection Act. Now, the President tonight will talk about many of the most important issues that matter to this country: economic opportunity, job creation, recovery from the deepest recession in recent history, giving people a greater sense of confidence and trust in their ability to gain the skill that they need to move forward in their lives. Mobility economically in this country is one of the great challenges that we face for our children and our grandchildren. Those issues of job creation and economic growth are what we should be debating, not H.R. 7, not the restrictions at the state level that seek to inhibit and impede a woman's exercise of that fundamental right to privacy. Let's keep in mind what is important to the American people, who sense deeply, because it is part of our cultural DNA, part of our fundamental reason for being as a nation, that we have a right to privacy over personal decisions that should be made by a woman in consultation with her doctor, her health care provider, her family, without interference by government bureaucrats or politicians. That's what's important, and ending the chilling effect of those state restrictions is also one of the goals. The chilling effect that deters women from exercising those rights, making those rights real, protecting a woman's right to decide whether and when to have a child. Every pregnant woman faces her own unique circumstances and challenges, and she has a right to make her own decision based on her own values and guidance from the physician she trusts, the family members she loves, and her personal goals, what is right for her family. In the 40 years since Roe v. Wade, the attacks on this right have not been slowed. They've merely evolved, and they've taken new forms. I've stand with my colleagues today and asked that we recognize together these pervasive threats, that we counter them and stand together in fighting back. I am very proud to stand today with Senator Baldwin and Senator Murray, and proud to yield to Senator Baldwin.
The senator from Wisconsin.
Thank you. And I thank the senator from Connecticut. Last week marked the 41st anniversary of the landmark Supreme Court decision in Roe v. Wade that affirmed that women have the right to make their own personal health care decisions and to have access to safe and legal reproductive care. The anniversary of Roe should commemorate how far our country has progressed in the last 40 years in safeguarding women's reproductive freedoms and access to quality health care. But today I rise to recognize that history has been made in another way, and that is turning back the clock. Americans across the country expect to have access to high-quality, dependable health care when they and their families need it. Unfortunately for women across this country, this access has come under attack. As my colleagues and I have worked to reform our health care system to expand access to quality, affordable health care, too many states have enacted record numbers of laws that restrict a woman's access to comprehensive reproductive health services and the freedom to make her own health care decisions. In the past 3 years, states across the country have enacted a total of 205 provisions that restrict women's access to safe abortion services. In 2013 alone, states enacted 70 of these measures. In my home state of Wisconsin, we are now ranked as one of the worst states when it comes to a woman's reproductive rights. thanks to our Republican governor and legislature. Wisconsin women, families, and their doctors are facing a slew of new and radical restrictions to health services mandated by one-party Republican rule in my state. Most recently, our governor has enacted 4 new restrictions on women's access to safe and legal abortion care in our state. For one, he signed a law that not only forces women to undergo unnecessary medical procedures, but also imposes unreasonable requirements on doctors that deliver care to women. I recently heard from a mother in Middleton, Wisconsin. She found out that her baby had severe fetal anomalies and would not survive delivery. She had to undergo an emergency termination, and a clinic in Milwaukee was the only place that would do the procedure. But because the governor was set to sign this law imposing unreasonable requirements on providers, the clinic was preparing to close its doors and wouldn't schedule her for an appointment. She and her husband were forced to find child care for their 2 sons and leave the state and travel to Minnesota just to get the medical care that she needed. If not for a federal court order blocking the law shortly after the governor signed it, the admitting privileges provision would have reduced women's access to safe and legal abortions in Wisconsin by 66%, closing several health care clinics and leaving women out in the cold. But unfortunately for this woman in Middleton, the court order did not come fast enough, and the governor's law disrupted her family during a deeply personal and trying time. The threat in Wisconsin and in states across the country is clear. Politicians are doing this because they think they know better than women and their doctors. The fact is, they don't. It is not the job of politicians to play doctor and to dictate how these professionals practice medicine. Nor is it the job to intrude in the private lives and important health decisions of American families. That is why I am proud to stand with my colleagues, including my good friend from Connecticut and my good friend from Washington State, and challenge these attacks on women's freedoms. I am proud to have introduced the Women's Health Protection Act because every American woman deserves the freedom to exercise her constitutional rights by making personal health decisions for herself and for her family with a trusted doctor and without political interference. Our bill makes it clear that states can no longer enact laws that unduly limit access to reproductive health care and that do nothing to further women's health or safety. The Women's Health Protection Act creates federal protections against state restrictions that fail to ensure women's health and intrude upon personal decision-making. It promotes and protects a woman's individual constitutional rights and guarantees that she can make her own responsible health care decisions no matter where she lives. Elected officials should not put politics before women's health and women's safety. Women are more than capable of making their own personal medical decisions without consulting their legislator. And every woman in America deserves the freedom to plan her own family, to make her own health care decisions, and to have access to essential and quality women's health care services. We need to act now to guarantee that women will continue to have that freedom. Today, I stand with 33 of my Senate colleagues and 99 members of the House of Representatives to move our country forward with the Women's Health Protection Act and to safeguard women's constitutional rights under Roe. We need to act now to protect a woman's access to care and her constitutional rights, no matter where she lives, by enacting the Women's Health Protection Act. And again, I thank my colleagues, in particular my good friend from Connecticut, in leading us on this discussion here today on the Senate floor, but also with the introduction of the bill. I would yield back.
Madam President.
Senator from Washington.
Madam President, I want to thank my colleagues from Connecticut and Wisconsin for their strong voices and support for a woman to make her own health care decisions in this country. And I appreciate them being here today to talk about that and to note with me that 41 years ago, last week, just about 400 yards from where we are standing today, the course of history for women in the United States was changed forever. After over a century of struggle, a new generation of American women had access to safe and legal abortions. With one case, American women had gained the ability to make their own decisions about their own health care and their own bodies. At a time when some members of this body were far too young to remember, women stood up to the restrictive laws of states and the federal government and to the men who at that time wrote them. Now, Madam President, I'd like to think that after 4 decades, many of those who want to make women's health care decisions for them have come to grips with the fact that Roe v. Wade is settled law. But unfortunately, that notion is quickly shattered with one look at our legislatures across the country and efforts right here in Congress. In fact, tomorrow, the House of Representatives is slated to vote on their misleadingly named No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act. That bill severely undermines a woman's access to insurance coverage of comprehensive health care and fails to allow her to get the care she needs even when her own health is at risk. It's nothing more than an attempt to eliminate access to abortion services while restricting a woman's ability to make personal decisions about her own care. I guess we shouldn't be surprised, Madam President. The truth is that the tide of these politically driven, extreme, and unconstitutional laws continues to rise. In 2013, our nation saw yet another record-breaking year of state legislatures passing restrictive legislation barring women's access to abortion services. In fact, in the past 3 years, the United States has enacted more of these restrictions than in the previous 10 years combined. That means that now, more than ever, it's our job to protect this decision for women, to fight for women's health, and to ensure that women's health does not become a political football. For that reason, today, I will, along with 18 other members of my caucus, file a brief with the Supreme Court of the United States in the case of Hobby Lobby Stores, Inc. versus Sebelius. And just like the many attempts before this case, there are those out there who would like the American public to believe that this conversation is anything but an attack on women's health care. To them, it's a debate about freedom, except, of course, for the freedom of women to access their own care. It's no different than when we are told that attacks on abortion rights aren't an infringement on a woman's right to choose. They are about religion or states' rights. Or when we are told that restricting emergency contraception isn't about limiting women's ability to make our own family planning decisions, it's about protecting pharmacists. Or, just like last week, when we were told that a certain former Republican governor's comments about women's libido was, quote, tone issue, rather than a direct reflection of the Republican Party's misguided and arcane policies. The truth is, this case is about contraception. This is an attempt to limit a woman's ability to access care. This is about women. Allowing a woman's boss to call the shots about her access to birth control should be inconceivable to all Americans in this day and age, and takes us back to a place in history when women had no voice or no choice. In fact, contraception was included as a required preventive service in the Affordable Care Act on the recommendation of an independent, nonprofit Institute of Medicine and other medical experts because it is essential to the health of women and their families. After many years of research, we know ensuring access for effective birth control has a direct impact on improving the lives of women and families in America. We have been able to directly link it to declines in maternal and infant mortality, reduced risk of ovarian cancer, better overall health care outcomes for women, and far fewer unintended pregnancies and abortions, which is a goal we should all share. But what's at stake in this case before the Supreme Court is whether a CEO's personal belief trumps a woman's right to access free or low-cost contraception under the Affordable Care Act. Madam President, every American deserves to have access to high-quality health care coverage regardless of where they work. And each of us should have the right to make our own medical and religious decisions without being dictated to by or limited by our employer. Contraceptive coverage is supported by the vast majority of Americans who understand how important it is for women and families. In weighing this case, my hope is that the court realizes that women working for private companies should be afforded the same access to medical care regardless of who signs their paycheck. We can't allow for-profit, secular corporations or their shareholders to deny female employees access to comprehensive women's health care under the guise of a religious exemption. It's as if we're saying that because you are a CEO or a shareholder in a corporation, your rights are more important than your employees who happen to be women. That is a very slippery slope that could lead to employers cutting off coverage for childhood immunizations if they object to it, or prenatal care for children born to unmarried parents if they thought that was wrong, or an employee's ability to access HIV treatment. Madam President, I'm proud to be joined in this effort by 18 other senators who were here when Congress enacted the religious protections through the Religious Freedom Restoration Act in 1993, and who also were here when Congress made access to women's health available through the Affordable Care Act in 2010. They are senators who know that Congress never intended for a corporation or furthermore its shareholders to restrict a woman's access to preventive health care, because we all know that improving access to birth control is good health policy and good economic policy. We know it will mean healthier women, healthier children, and healthier families, and we know it will save money for businesses and consumers. So today, we are taking another step forward to uphold the promise we made to women and provide this access broadly. And I believe that our nation will be better for it. With that, Madam President, I have 7 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leader, and I ask unanimous consent these requests be agreed to and be printed in the record.
Without objection.
And Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that Rose Matuso, a fellow in Senator Kuhn's office, be given floor privileges for Wednesday, January 29, 2014.
Without objection.
Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President,
Senator from South Dakota.
I ask unanimous consent to speak for as much time as I may consume. Okay. Then for no longer than 15 minutes.
Without objection.
Madam President, tonight the President of the United States will come before the Congress and make his State of the Union address. That is an annual ritual that we go through around here every year, and I've been through State of the Union speeches through multiple administrations. I sort of liken them to somebody making New Year's resolutions at the beginning of the new year, filled with lots of rhetoric and promises, most of which gets left on the cutting room floor when the speech concludes. But that being said, it is something that gives the President an opportunity to lay out his agenda for the coming year. And rumor has it that this year the President's speech is going to focus on income equality and economic opportunity. Well, Madam President, that is good to hear, because these last 5 years of the Obama administration have been devastating to Americans who are trying to advance economically. Now, nobody can deny that the President inherited a difficult economic situation. I think we would all concede that at the very outset. But he has had now 5 years, going on 6, to make things better. Unfortunately, he hasn't made much progress. For the majority of Americans, things don't look much better today than they did 5 years ago. The economy still isn't working. Unemployment remains at historic recession-high levels. Income equality is at the highest point literally in 86 years. Household income has dropped by nearly $4,000 since the President took office. I'd like to quote from a piece that was published on Sunday, and it said this, and I quote, "The last 5 years have been cataclysmic. The average income of the top 1% of earners increased by about 31.4% from 2009 to 2012, while wages for the other 99% essentially stood still. The proportion of economic gains going to the very wealthy under the Obama administration is greater than it was under Mr. Bush," end quote. Now, Madam President, those are not Republican talking points. That's from a column published in the New York Times. The column goes on to state, and I quote again, "The rich-poor gap in the United States is now greater than in any other industrialized country. Upward mobility, a staple of the American dream, is eroding compared with more than a few nations," end quote. That again, Madam President, from the New York Times. Now, whether the author intended it that way or not, it's a pretty damning indictment of the economic policies of the past 5 years. So I'm glad to hear the President is planning to focus on income inequality and economic opportunity tonight. These statistics make it very clear just how important it is that we have that discussion right now. And they also make it clear that we can't continue the economic policies of the past 5 years because these policies have clearly failed. The President has tried throwing taxpayer money at the problem. Witness the failed trillion-dollar stimulus bill. He's tried economic band-aids that attempt to alleviate some of the symptoms of economic stagnation without doing anything to address the cause. Neither of those strategies has been successful in doing the one thing that will turn our economy around, and that is creating full-time, well-paying jobs for American people. Extending unemployment benefits or offering food stamps may provide short-term relief, but no government assistance is going to provide a stable, secure, prosperous future like a good job will. Real long-term economic security and prosperity come when families have access to stable, well-paying jobs with the potential for advancement. If we really want to help Americans, if we really want to get our economy growing, if that's where our focus needs to be, Madam President, it's creating the kind of environment where job creation can flourish. And that means making it easier and less expensive for businesses, particularly small businesses, which create a majority of the jobs in this country, to expand and hire new workers. Unfortunately, the President spent much of his presidency making it more difficult. Obamacare, for example, saddled businesses with a host of new taxes and regulations that have made it difficult, or in some cases impossible, for businesses to hire new employees. CBS News reported in December that, and I quote, "nearly half of U.S. companies said they're reluctant to hire full-time employees because of the law, the Obamacare law," end quote. Now, that's not how you want businesses to feel if you're looking to encourage them to grow and create jobs. So I'm hoping that this evening the President will turn away from the policies that have made nearly half of U.S. companies too worried to hire new full-time employees and turn toward policies that will enable real job creation in our economy. According to his advisors, the President wants 2014 to be a year of action. Well, Republicans couldn't agree more. And there are a number of actions that we think the President can take, and I hope that he will announce them tonight. One thing Republicans and Democrats agree on and would like the President to do is grant immediate approval of the Keystone Pipeline. According to the President's own State Department, the Keystone Pipeline would support 42,000 jobs that would provide $2 billion in wages and earnings without taxpayers having to spend a dime. All that's required for the creation of these jobs is the President's approval, which he has inexplicably delayed now for 5 years, despite numerous reports testifying to the benefits of the project and its low environmental impact. The President's staff has spent a lot of time over the past week talking about the President's intention of acting without Congress when Congress disagrees with him. Well, here's something, Madam President, the President can legitimately do unilaterally. He has the authority to open the door to these 42,000 jobs. And I hope this evening that he will announce his intention of acting on approval of the Keystone Pipeline. Another thing I hope the President will do tonight is encourage the Majority Leader to take up dozens of bills that have been passed by the House of Representatives. Many of these bills passed the House with bipartisan support and get past the Senate the same way. There's no good reason why the Majority Leaders decided to let them languish. Now, surely we could take up a few of those bills. The President ought to call on his party to pass these bills and to get Americans back to work. In the same spirit, I hope the President will call on his party in the Senate to approve trade promotion authority legislation, which would help create U.S. jobs by giving farmers, ranchers, entrepreneurs, and job creators in this country access to 1 billion new consumers around the globe. Republicans hope the President will use that phone of his that he keeps talking about to call the Majority Leader here in the Senate and encourage him to pass trade promotion authority as soon as possible. Of course, no discussion of relief for middle-class Americans and job creators is complete without discussing Obamacare, which is putting an intolerable burden on middle-class families and small businesses. Now, I'm not very hopeful that the President is going to announce his intention tonight of working with Congress to repair some of the worst parts of his signature law. But for all Americans' sakes, I hope he does. Around the country, families are reeling under the impact of Obamacare. Higher insurance premiums, higher out-of-pocket costs, reduced access to doctors and hospitals. Meanwhile, businesses are cutting workers' hours, eliminating health care plans, or declining to expand their businesses to protect themselves from Obamacare's burdensome taxes and regulations. There is bipartisan support for more than one change to Obamacare, and there is particularly strong support for repealing the job-killing medical device tax, which is forcing medical device companies to send American jobs overseas. In March of last year, the Senate voted 79-20. 79-20 in the United States Senate against the tax. More than 30 Democrats voted for repeal. The President's really serious about putting Americans back to work. He will announce his intention of working with Congress to repeal this job-destroying portion of his legislation. Madam President, last month almost 350,000 Americans gave up looking for jobs and dropped out of the labor force altogether. That's 350,000 Americans in 1 month. 1 month who gave up looking for a job. The labor force participation rate is at its lowest level in 36 years. More than 10 million Americans are looking for work, and nearly 4 million of them have been unemployed for more than 6 months. In fact, if you had the labor participation rate today that we had when the President took office, the unemployment rate today would be about 11%. Madam President, it is definitely time for a year of action. It's time to leave behind the economic Band-Aids of the past 5 years and focus on policies that will not address just the symptoms, but the cause of our weak economic growth. We need to remove the obstacles facing our nation's job creators so that struggling Americans can finally get back to work. We need to help create a future where every American has the opportunity for a well-paying, full-time job with the possibility of advancement. And, Madam President, you're not going to see that as long as the policies coming out of Washington, D.C. and this administration make it more expensive and more difficult to create jobs for the American people. And you're not going to do anything about income inequality if you drive people's cost of living higher, which is what Obamacare's premium increases, higher out-of-pocket increases, energy cost increases. There are new regulations coming out today. They're going to put new requirements and regulations on existing coal-fired power plants that are going to drive electricity costs through the roof for the people that I represent in South Dakota. 50% of the electricity in South Dakota comes from coal-fired power. We're told the administration is coming out with regulations that are going to apply those same things to, or these are to new, but to existing coal-fired power. So you're going to have not only new plants that are going to be prevented from being constructed, but those that are existing that are going to have to modify their plants at enormous cost, in many cases with technologies that don't exist yet. All that does is put people out of work and make it more expensive for middle-class Americans to make ends meet. You want to do something about income inequality? Provide good-paying jobs for middle-class families in this country, put policies in place that make it less expensive, less difficult to create those jobs, and that drive down the cost for middle-class Americans rather than raising them. Rather than having higher energy costs, higher health care costs, higher this, higher that, all because of policies coming out of Washington, we can do better. While the President's not always shown his eagerness to work with Congress in the past, and I'm told tonight he's going to talk about all the things he can do unilaterally, I hope that tonight's State of the Union address will mark a new start. Republicans are ready to get to work. I hope the President is too. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the Senate stands in recess until 2:15 p.m.
So the Senate is in recess for their weekly party lunches now. Lawmakers will return at 2:15 Eastern. They'll continue to debate the flood insurance bill. We could also hear from Senate leaders as they return from their lunches. We'll have live coverage of the Senate when they gavel back in again at 2:15 Eastern this afternoon here on C-SPAN 2.